You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program, and we thank you for joining us today. We know you're out there streaming online from all over the world, and in fact, today on our program, we're going to be talking about just that. I'm Daniel Davis, your host, and we want to kind of let you know a little bit about what our show is about. We've been on the air now for about 4 years. We've been on terrestrial radio and thought we would also kind of add this to our repertoire, so that way we could reach out to you baby boomers out there, you people that are 40 plus. Let's say 40 to 60 or 40 to 100. Maybe you're even 35, 30, or 21. It doesn't matter, whatever age you are. Because the Beyond 50 radio show is really a show for everybody. People tend to ask us, well, what does Beyond 50 mean? Well, think about it. 50 is usually that halfway point. Everybody's always talking about middle age. Everybody's always wondering, well, am I going to have one of them middle age crises? Well, in the 4 years of doing our program, we've discovered that sometimes the way that our mainstream media tends to portray this particular age group is this aging senior citizen that needs to be popping pills and shoved into a senior center, and then that's the end of their lives. No wonder our young people want to sit there and say to themselves, I don't ever want to become old. I want to hold on to my youth as long as I can. But in fact, as you begin to talk with this particular group of people, the midlifers, if you want to call them, the people who are beyond 50, you'll begin to hear from them the idea that life is actually a lot better now than it's ever been. Well, sure, you're 21, you're 18, and you're asking yourself, how is that possible? I'm young, and I'm full of youth, and I have pretty much all the time in the world ahead of me. Well, why don't you ask yourself this question, what are you doing about it? You know, are you living out all your dreams? Are you still one of those people at that particular age who's out there just yearning to please other people? What are you doing, in fact? Well, that's what we also showcase a lot here on the Beyond 50 radio program. Let's just say that you're one of these 18 to 28-year-olds that most mainstream radio and television like to appeal to, this younger generation that is just trying to yearn to figure out what it is they want to do next while they're holding on to their youth. Well, here it is, mainstream radio and television. They're appealing. They said, this is the demographic we want. We want the 18 to 35-year-old. Well, I know that as we've talked with people on the Beyond 50 radio program, and we've done many trade shows as well, so we get to talk with people face-to-face, and it's always interesting to see what their reaction is as they take a look at our banner, Beyond 50. Well, that's not me. Beyond 50? I don't know, I'm not there yet. There's always all this denial. Well, the question probably to ask those particular people would simply be, what are you doing with your life? Are you living the kind of life that you'd like to live? And if you have, then what other dreams and aspirations do you want to fulfill as you see yourself walking onto that wonderful sunset? Well, today joining us on the Beyond 50 radio program is someone who had a 50-year dream, from what we understand. This was a dream that she had since high school. So see, when I'm talking about those people that the radio and mainstream television want to reach, we're talking about somebody who was back in high school. But did you ever dream of doing something such as walking the Gobi Desert? I'd hazard a guess that there are probably quite a few youngsters out there that probably have never even heard of the Gobi. We're going to find out about it today as our guest today decided to go ahead and trek 1,600 miles across the blistering desert with her husband, Bill, and two wonderful camels simply named Tom and Jerry. And she's going to share her experience with us today here on the Beyond 50 radio program as we talk about her new book, Walking the Gobi. And our guest joining us today is Helen Thayer. And Helen, thank you for joining us on the Beyond 50 radio program today.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Now, I guess I would have to ask the same question that was pretty consistent throughout your book is, nobody ever did that, so why?
Well, it's certainly a legitimate question that we're often asked, but our reason was Adventure Classroom program, an educational program for students K through 12, in which we bring the four corners of the world into the classroom to teach not only geography, history, and information about cultural events, but also the goal, life setting goals, or lifestyle setting goals, planning for success, and being persistent and not giving up on yourself.
Well, you certainly had all those elements in your corner because, crossing the Gobi, for instance, or any desert, and when it comes to most people's minds is, those scenes that you might see on television from Lawrence of Arabia or, someone who's stranded in the desert and they're clawing and grasping onto each breath and each grain of sand, desperately searching for water, and there on the horizon is that elusive oasis that may or may not exist, and they're just hoping to get there. But yours was certainly a journey that was very not only compelling, but probably stretched the element of who you are as a person.
Yes, we certainly had to dig deep to survive this one, and in certain places it was very, very tough. But of course, there was also the element of meeting the nomads, living with the nomads, and learning their ancient ways, and just learning what wonderful, hospitable people these people are, and how kind and generous they are. And way out there in the remote Gobi Desert, these people live a very optimistic lifestyle, and they're always looking ahead to better days.
Now, Helen, it's as I was reading your book, Walking the Gobi, is that when you talk about the nomadic tribes, it's really fascinating to know that people are still living that same way. And, as I've even done many different shows on different cultures around the world, you have like the Inuits, that you would find up in Hudson Bay in the area and the like, and then there are several other types. What is it like? What is the lifestyle for the nomadic people?
Well, their lifestyle is very harsh. They have to put up with winters that can drop to minus 40 degrees, with the winds howling across Mongolia from Siberia. And the snow and ice can be so bad that their herds often die in the more severe winters. And then there are the summers. We experienced up to 126 degrees, and 120 degrees wasn't too uncommon, and that's in the shade. In the Gobi, there basically is no shade.
Mm-hmm. I know as I was reading through your book, you have a lot of jagged, rocky, mountainous-type cliffs, as you were describing. Then you'd see colors of red, and then in the evenings you would see stars that felt so close as though you could pluck them out of the sky. I remember having that same experience being on the Atlantic Ocean in the evening. It's just so dark out there that you feel like you could reach up and you could just grab stars right out of the sky. And, as you're reading through the book, Walking the Gobi, you realize that, as you were talking about earlier in the program, it's also about sharing a possibility of a lifestyle. When we take a look at your lifestyle, for instance, you've skied the magnetic North Pole, you lived among the wolves in Alaska, kayaked the Amazon, walked across the Sahara, on and on and on and on and on, and you can realize that life truly is an adventure. And that started from pretty much your home area of New Zealand, as I understand.
That's right. I was born and raised in New Zealand, and I climbed my first mountain when I was 9 years old. And my parents were great examples to me for setting goals and planning well and being persistent. Sir Edmund Hillary was a friend. He's the first person to summit Mount Everest, and he was a great inspiration to me. And so I grew up in that atmosphere, and I became an international track and field athlete and then United States national luge champion. And also at the same time, I was a high-altitude mountain climber, which means that I was climbing mountains over 20,000 feet high. But I finally decided in 1986, as I was standing on top of peak communism at almost 25,000 feet in Tajikistan, that it was time for me to do something constructive with my experiences, and I decided on some sort of educational program, and later I decided on the name Adventure Classroom, and it would be for students for K through 12. So then that's when I walked to the pole alone to begin that program of education.
Well, Helen, I think that's a great, fantastic life goal, because when you take a look at how school is set up, geography is set up where you have to know where places are and what cities are in those places, and possibly what type of, lifestyle, who these people are that live there. But then there are a lot of places that you just don't know. And when you take a look at the Gobi Desert, it's, kind of strange. When you think the Gobi Desert, you think desolate, nobody lives out there. But apparently the Gobi, as you were explaining, houses about 3 million people. So you kind of figure, well, where are all these people at?
Well, that's 3 million people for the entire country of Mongolia.
Uh-huh.
Only perhaps half of them, or less than half, probably, well, about half of them would live in the actual Gobi Desert. The Gobi Desert stretches from about the middle, stretches across, starting from the middle section of Mongolia right down to the Chinese border and beyond. And tourists very often people often tell me they've been to the Gobi Desert, but they've really been just to the northern portion, to the tourist areas, and that's about it. But the real Gobi is very, very deep down toward the Chinese border, which is why we went that far south to experience the true Gobi and meet the people who are truly leading these ancient lifestyles away from tourists and away from the influence of Western culture.
I think it's interesting, too, when you talk about how people tend to be in the northern part of the Gobi, that when people approach midlife, so to speak, that they tend to go on these crazy adventures so they can say, well, I kind of lived my way on the way up, dangerously, so to speak, such as going to Spain and running among the bulls, fanatical
yes.
things like that. But they really don't do the deeper sort of stuff. Now, what was really neat is that you talked about how you trained for this, and in fact, as you were just, ready to get into training, and that you had a tragic automobile accident where you were rear-ended, and that caused, I believe, an injury to the spine, which caused tremendous pain in your leg. So you really put yourself into this situation to be successful, and you talk quite a bit about planning and how you set up about food and water, because it was just you and your husband and the two camels, Tom and Jerry. Now, describe that scenario there, because I thought it was just fascinating, because I couldn't imagine too many couples that I know of that would want to spend that much time together. And here you're doing it in the Gobi Desert.
We actually celebrated our 40th anniversary in the middle of the Gobi Desert, and we do very well on expeditions together. Bill is a very, very strong expedition partner, and he's has lots of stamina, lots of determination, and he plans well, and we just hit it off really well like that. So it's very easy for us to form a team. In fact, that's why we don't take anyone else with us, because we make such the perfect team that we get along so well and we get the job done. Mm-hmm. And we can walk 15 to 18 hours a day, and we don't complain about it. And we just put the tent up without complaining, even in the worst of storms. The tent just goes up, and we each know what our job is, and we do it without a word, and it gets done. And so it actually works out very well. But this journey we had to, of course, on these journeys, all of these journeys, you learn a lot about yourself and learn to appreciate nature as it really is, and not the Western interpretation of nature. We see nature out there in the survival mode as it really is.
Mm-hmm. And you also had to do quite a bit of planning as well, and it was funny how you described the attitudes and personalities of camels.
Oh, yes, camels are quite unique. They can be very bad-tempered and cantankerous, but these... We find
and arrogant at the same time. They even have that presentation about them.
Oh, yes, they have that haughty attitude that they were put on this earth to rule all others, and that's really basically their attitude. But we won them over. In fact, we became a four-person team. It seemed they became people to us. They were our pets, and they were our people partners. So there was Bill and I were the two humans, and with our two camels, we figured ourselves a four-person team in the end. But they, after a while, they began to see things our way, and they could see that we had a good attitude toward them, and we respected them. And we find that with the animals that we deal with on expeditions, that once they understand that, then we win them over fairly easily.
And certainly giving them camel cookies doesn't hurt.
Oh, yes, of course, we had camel cookie bribes. We had to resupply every 20 days because of the lack of water in the Gobi Desert, but we had the pilot bring in a 20-pound bag of camel cookies. They were vanilla cookies, and they served very well. The nomads were really quite shocked that we would feed them something like that. They'd never heard of anything like that, but it worked very well. We were able to win them over quite nicely.
We're talking with Helen Thayer here on the Beyond 50 radio program and her book, Walking the Gobi. It was interesting because you said that as you embarked on this, your whole goal was not only just because it had been a lifelong goal for yours, but was also to set up an educational course where, K through 12 could actually experience geography in a much different way, very first person, instead of here's the Gobi, it's 1,600 miles that they tracked, or it's this big, it's in between Russia and China, that there were more elements that you wanted for people to understand about that. So as you talk about the camels, for instance, I didn't know things like, camels tend to chew, for instance, dry twigs and things like that they can actually digest and do the kinds of things camels can do. And describe for our listeners, exactly, this interesting creature, why it would be, designed to do what it does, because I found it quite fascinating as you described, Tom and Jerry, especially, what camels were and how they were, and the area that they're in.
Well, the camels are, of course, as we've found, as we travel among various wild and domestic species of animals, they're all adapted to their environment. Unlike we humans really don't belong in the middle of the Gobi Desert at all. The nomads, of course, they've adapted to it, but we Westerners haven't, and we flounder about a bit. But the animals, the camels in particular, they're quite amazing. They have the Bactrian camels are the species that live in the Gobi Desert, and they have the two humps, and the humps are filled with fat. And you might call the humps their survival kit, because this is the fat that they use in times of starvation. And when a camel hasn't been able to eat in quite a while, they'll use that fat, and those humps become just loose sacks, empty sacks that just flop to one side. But when they're filled with fat, they stand tall and firm. And so these camels, as they walk across the desert, they have that emergency supply with them all the time. Their feet are very interesting. They're flat on the bottom. They just basically float across the sand, the surface of the sand, while we would flounder through, especially when we came to sand dunes, we'd flounder along with sand over our ankles. But the camels had no problem, and they can go without water for many days, whereas we humans, at temperatures over 120 degrees, one day without water can just about kill you.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine. I know you were talking about a particular trek that you were dangerously getting along the Chinese border, and that's what we would like to touch on, too. You don't just simply go to the Gobi and decide, I'm going to go through this trek. But, when you talk about, as you did in your book, about the Soviet occupation, and you were describing a lot of the old Soviet buildings, where there used to be the occupation, lots of vodka bottles here and there. You can see that that I guess the Mongolians had a taste for vodka as well. But there are a lot of elements besides just the natural element that you had to contend with, and I'd like for you to kind of tell our audience, what some of those were, that this isn't just something you just decide one day, I'm going to go do that. As you talked about, for instance, in your book, you spent at least 10 months training in Death Valley, California, and then, of course, you had the accident, which made it even more difficult, and you see yourself at being 63 with, the pain-ridden leg, as you were talking about, but you still did it, and it was because of, as you said, attitude and planning. But when you talk about the elements of going to do this, share with the people, what the things you have to go through to even think about stepping onto the Gobi the way that you folks did.
Well, because we wanted to travel very deep into the Gobi, where tourists never go, and right down on the border of China, the Mongolian government was very nervous about this, because this is really no man's land where they don't allow foreigners to go at all. And so we had to have special permission to travel that route. But then as we actually had to really we had to work very hard to get our permits, because these people, as I said, were quite nervous about it. And as I said, nobody has ever walked across the entire length of the Gobi Desert before, and they kept wondering what we would do because of the lack of water and all these sorts of things. But finally we laid out our plans in detail, and they could see that with our previous experience of walking across the Sahara and walking through American deserts and through Death Valley, that they knew that we had the experience at hand. And finally they gave us our permits, but that was just the first step. We had to then, of course, train for this climate, figure out how we could get across a desert that has very, very little water. It's not like the Sahara. The Sahara Desert has an oasis here and there, and even major wells are marked on your map. But here in the Gobi, we were walking across a blank place in the world where no wells are marked on the maps, no roads to follow, nothing. We just had to set out from the eastern edge and just navigate our way across the desert, following just our navigational instincts and knowledge, maps, satellite image maps, and compass and GPS. And the one great hazard we had, of course, was smugglers. Drug smugglers walk across or drive across the border in jeeps, and they come up from China, cross the border into Mongolia, then they go the reverse direction as well. And of course we were traveling from west to east, which means that we were traveling across the north-south smugglers' routes, which was not very safe. In the beginning we thought, well, when the temperatures get too high and too unbearable, we'll walk at night, in spite of the danger of snakes and scorpions, but we figured we could do the nighttime routine. But we soon learned, it wasn't very long before we learned our lesson on that one. We were almost caught by some smugglers one night in the darkness, and we were just fortunate that they were using no lights as they drove across the desert and across the border. Otherwise we would have been seen. And but we managed to get out of that, and then that taught us the lesson that walking at night wasn't a great idea at all if we wanted to stay alive.
Especially if you get caught by the Chinese Border Patrol, which in fact actually happened, because here you were asking, I guess, a family of nomads, which is the best direction to go, and they pointed in one particular direction for you to follow, and you noticed that you were starting to breach that Chinese border area, and that's where you found yourself running into a little bit of trouble. And that was in the beginning of your journey, and you still had several hundred miles to go.
That was fairly early on, and we found ourselves in China, and that was not good news at all, because we'd been told when we got our permits that if we strayed into China, we would be shot on the spot without being questioned, because they would accuse us of being drug smugglers. So we had many hours of interrogation, but finally, to make a long story short, we managed to get our way out of that one. It was a close call and very difficult, but we got, mostly it was our age, because we were the interrogators. We were the interrogators' elders, and in Mongolian tradition, they respect their elders above all else. And when we pointed out that we could have been his grandparents, then his attitude changed quite dramatically. And so finally we were let go. But then we had to go through interrogation again later on with his superiors, but again we did the same thing there. And we finally we got out of that predicament, and obviously we're not shot. We weren't even sent to prison or even fined. They finally let us go. And again, it was our age that helped us out. So being a senior adventure definitely has its advantages at times.
Well, it certainly seems to outside of America, doesn't it?
Yes, we don't find the same thing happens here, but when we go overseas and to these indigenous cultures, most of them do respect age. They respect their elders above all else, and they take care of them and honor them in many, many ways. But when we come home, of course, we find it's a very different story.
Yeah, I know that we've been doing this program now for about 4 years, and one of the big reasons that we wanted to embark on creating a show such as Beyond 50 is that we also wanted to show the younger generation, there is going to be a time that you're going to be here. What is your life going to look like then? Because it seems this day and age that, at least in America, and that sometimes I know that through the course of the show it makes maybe the audience think, well, you seem to be picking on America a lot. I love America, but I think it's more of the attitude that we have here about, our middle age to our elders is that, they're cast aside, their job is done, and I kind of point, well, this is probably an attitude that started with the Industrial Revolution back in the late 1800s into the early 1900s. And so when we have guests such as yourself who have been out there, who have been doing things such as crossing the Gobi at the age of 63, your husband was 74, these aren't a couple of American couch potatoes who were just, sitting on their laurels in retirement watching, Jeopardy, for instance, ready to go to bed by 8, but people who are actually out there in the world still grasping life just as they always have, and so we hope that that inspires people to do the very much same thing and to see what it is to be respected as you get older. And I sometimes wonder if the youth just doesn't get led astray thinking, I don't want to get older because I know I don't respect those people, so I don't want to be one that's going to be in that position. But when you travel such as you have, you realize, that's just an attitude that's carried here that certainly should change.
Well, it certainly is. I was born and raised in New Zealand, and now I have dual citizenship. I'm also an American citizen, and I'm very proud of being an American, and I think America is the most wonderful country, and the people are most wonderful. Mm-hmm. But the only problem that I see is the lack of respect for seniors. We know it's a glaring difference. When we go overseas and live among these indigenous cultures, it's so different than living among our own people. As we get older, we find that the younger people have less respect, and we look at these people and think, one day you're going to be our age, but what will you be doing with your life? Will you be constructive? Will you be active? Or will you have some sort of disability by that time? Who knows? You can't tell when you're just, say, 20-something or 30-something years old. And
or even bitterness in the later years, as I tend to see some. It's like, what happened to you? Where did you go astray? It was choices that you made, but, So anyway, as you were saying.
Yeah, yes, and it is choices that they make, and they don't always make good choices, and they don't think ahead to where they might look down their nose, so to speak, at a senior because of something or other, but they don't stop to think that they might be there if they're lucky and they live long enough, they will be there. If they're unlucky, then they will never arrive at that age. And I think that if the young people took the opportunity to learn from their seniors, respect them, and in respecting them, they could learn from all those years of experience. I'm now 70 years old, and I'm about to embark on a long walk of 3,000 miles across Bhutan and Tibet. My husband and I will be a two-person team again doing this. And we've made these choices in our lives, and I think that we find now with all the experience we have, all those experiences have given us more knowledge, and we're still learning, of course. So when we're 80, we'll know a lot more than when we're 70.
You certainly will.
We go on, and we keep learning. The young people could gather that knowledge so easily by simply asking and respecting, but that's not where the youthful society of the Western, and it's not just America, it's the Western world.
Exactly.
The world is the same.
I keep remembering a scene from the movie Contact, where they're talking about how, has technology made us a better society? And sometimes you kind of wonder, has it? Because here you are, you and your husband, you're 63, he's 74, and you're out in the Gobi, and technology is non-existent. And in fact, you broke your plan down, I believe, it was in 20 or 25 days segments, wasn't it, where you would get resupplied?
Yes, we broke it down into each 20 days so that we would only think about the next 20 days and not think about the end of the journey. Because when you're on day one and you've got 1,600 miles to go, and you look out across that vast place that you're supposed to cross, and there's going to be rocky mountain ranges in your way and sand dunes in your way, and rocky plains, sandy plains. There's going to be sandstorms, snakes, and scorpions, and drug smugglers, and if you're not careful, the border guards. If you happen to stray across the border by mistake, there's all these hazards ahead of you. So we find the best way is to just cut it down into segments that mentally you can handle. And then once you've reached that segment, then you go for the next one and the next one. Very soon it's time for you to leave the desert altogether because you've crossed the whole thing.
And what's interesting, too, is that you didn't take walkie-talkies or ham radios or any way that you could be in contact with anyone outside of yourselves. And most travelers today, their plan includes every way, shape, and form that you can get in touch with somebody should you run into any trouble. But you can see where, because you, as you described, you and your husband Bill, are such a good team that you can really count on each other when the chips are up or down, that you really didn't need any of that outside help. You were just pretty much, I guess, leaving it up to faith. Would that be a good way to put it?
Well, to start with, the government wouldn't allow us to have any outside communication, radio or satellite phones, but that was fine for us because even if we had the choice, we would have taken a satellite phone for emergencies, but it would have been tucked away. Many people, when they go on various expeditions or similar journeys, they'll have to be in daily contact with a sponsor or the press or something like this. They're way out in the Never-Nevers giving these press conferences.
Exactly.
And sending
Come
back
through the
photos.
satellite and tell us how you're doing. We're live on remote. That's some journey.
And they're sending back photos on their computers and all this thing. Well, we refuse to do that because we're back to basics. We go on foot. We're human-powered. We don't have no mechanization. We're not hooked to society by an umbilical cord called a phone or a cell phone or any of these devices. We just go out and we just get the journey done, and we find that without all the trappings of so-called modern civilization, the Western civilization anyway, we do a lot better because we don't have to stop at night and make that phone call or get the computer out and send photos back and all this sort of thing. We figure plenty of time. We take around 4,000 to 6,000 photos during a journey anyway of this length. Plenty of time when we get back for me to write the book and tell the story and show people the photos via my presentations, and the media can get all the photos they want and all the copy they want then. But while we're on the journey, we just like to be alone and get it done. And this way we can really experience the environment as it really is. We're not constantly interrupting our thoughts to go back to a media conference or send photos back or something like that. We don't have to constantly interrupt ourselves. We can just go on day after day after day, immersed in our environment, immersed in the culture surrounding us, and we come out the other end with so much more knowledge and a real feel for the place and the people we visited and the place we've been.
I know that as I was enjoying the story of Into Thin Air, where there was Ed Hall took up 50 climbers and there was that tragic incident on the summit of Everest, that at the same time that now the name eludes me now for a minute, but was talking about how, Everest is a mountain that you have to pray and you have to respect, and it might allow you to summit it. And I would think that it would be the same way with the Gobi, that the true reason that you were able to accomplish your task or your dream of crossing, 1,600 miles of the Gobi Desert in 126-degree temperatures, you've got scorpions, you have wolves, you have drug smugglers, you have border patrol, is that you and your husband, Bill, decided, the reason this can happen is because of the tremendous respect and the surrendering of the fact that that's how you wanted to experience the Gobi. You were really showing it respect. Would that be kind of a perspective or a way that you would look at it?
It most definitely. We don't believe in going out and conquering our environment in order to succeed. We will never conquer it. We're just merely two human beings, just two really very tiny pieces of humanity passing through. And as we pass through, if we respect the environment, respect the people we meet, then that environment and those people will allow us to learn, rather than going through in an attack mode and with all of the telecommunications and modern technology and so forth, surrounded by all of this stuff. And, of course, the base camp and a base camp manager and your media consultant and all this, lots and lots of money going out as well. That I'm not criticizing other people's journeys. That's fine for them, and that's what they do, and that's fine. But for us, that's not our way. We go back to basics, no frills, basic, really relatively small budgets, and but no frills, just go out there, and this way we can experience the place as it really is. We don't add the frills of telecommunication and all this business. And when we put camp up at night, we want to eat and rest and get ready for the next day, 15 to 18-hour walk, not have to get the computer out and mess with that and send messages back and answer telephone calls. And we just couldn't stand that out there.
Yeah, I can imagine you couldn't. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. Our guest today, Helen Thayer, and we're talking about her new book, Walking the Gobi, hopefully inspiring people out there who decide, well, if you're going to take that retirement vacation, whatever it is, maybe you might want to reconsider, is this a vacation where I get to go and rest and come back and, and I've done all the same things there as I do at home? Or would it like to be more of a spiritual quest, maybe an educational one? I could see that with the many things that you've done, for instance, you kayak down the Amazon River, you've done both the North and the South Pole, many, many things I could see where, because of the way that you and your husband do it, as you said, there's no frills to this. You just take the basics, you stay with the basics, and you are in and of the earth, much as the Native American tribes of North America and South America talk so consistently about within their culture, is that, you're really one with what's going on here. How do you feel that has transformed you in a spiritual sense of being alive?
Well, we feel much more alive because of it. We feel very privileged to have gone into these environments. And of course, we do both adhere to the Christian faith, and we do each take we take one New Testament between us. No need for two; that just adds extra weight. And being simple again, you don't need one can read to the other and take turns, and that works nicely. So we do have our faith. We do believe very strongly. And we believe that if we are at one with our environment, then that environment's going to be a lot kinder. It's not as though we walk out there and face death and say, well, we're okay because we believe it. We really are at one with our environment, so nothing out here can hurt us. That's not true. We go out. That's why we plan so carefully. We have to plan to get around those scorpions and those snakes and plan to get around those drug smugglers and plan what we have to do if we should want, inadvertently go into China, because the border is so poorly marked, and you have to rely on your GPS for the border line, and so we plan carefully, and by our wits and our experience and our planning, we're able to survive these journeys.
And see, that's where someone like yourself and your husband, or as we were talking about earlier in the program, is that, that the youth should pay attention or at least respect the elders, because should there be a time they want to embark on a particular experience, who better than you and your husband to say, well, this is what you really need to do based on our experience. This should at least help you get halfway. The rest of it, of course, is your personal preparation and your attitude. And to remove this idea that you've been sitting in front of television watching people, as you were saying earlier, conquering these things and establishing themselves with these things, and to really respect, just how wonderful the world is that we live in and how much it wants to really share back with you, providing you go and you respect it. And part of that respect comes from proper planning, and that's something that, again, that our elders, our people beyond 50, can help us do.
Well, one thing we found in our journeys, we come back and there's a number of people will call, young people will call, mostly men. They want to know details of how they could make such a journey. In fact, after I walked to the magnetic North Pole alone, I was simply told by one fellow that I didn't need to worry at all. I didn't need to take my polar bear dog with me, Charlie.
Your polar bear dog. Huh?
Yes, I just had to take a gun and shoot the polar bears as I went. Well, of course, if he could have realized, I explained to him about the laws against shooting polar bears unless it's strictly in self-defense, and that means a polar bear about 20 feet away from you. And what happens to you if you only wound that polar bear? You're going to die in that case. So, and after I explained to him for about 30 minutes all the reasons why you do not just go out there thinking that you're going to shoot a bear, instead you plan to live with these creatures, and in my case I took an Inuit polar bear dog with me. I called him Charlie, and he came home, of course, after the expedition with me, and he lived to be 23 years old. And
wow, 23 years old? That's old for a dog.
He's yeah, that's right. He was a 100-pound Canadian Eskimo a husky, and his granddaddy was an Arctic wolf, and he was the most wonderful animal we have ever had the privilege to live with.
I could imagine it would be, yeah.
He was just astonishing. And so those are the sorts of things we do to plan to survive. We just don't walk out there and say, hey, bear, here I am, but, I'm a human, and I have this big gun, and I can just blow you away. That doesn't work, and that attitude is just about the worst attitude you can have anyway. And then, of course, we have people calling us, and they tell us about all the technical gear they're taking with them, their satellite phones and their telecommunication gear and their computer. Of course, they all have to take a computer with them, and they're going to do this and that and the other thing. And then they ask me, well, now, is there anything else we can add? And I tell them I wouldn't add a thing. What I'd do is leave all that stuff at home, take your maps, satellite image maps as well, and a GPS, and take 3 compasses in case something happens to another one. Take 2 GPS so you have a backup, and go. And if the government will allow you to take a satellite phone, take one, but only to be used in emergencies, and forget the rest of it. Leave it all at home. It's much lighter weight to carry. You don't have to carry all this stuff. You don't have to take batteries and worry about how to recharge batteries. And it just eliminates a lot of fuss and worry.
Now, as I'm thinking, as I'm talking, it was funny because, as I was reading through the book, and I'd like you to share, what the Gobi was like, some of the most exciting moments for you, what the landscape is, because you describe it so well, and you think, boy, this seems like an outpost on Mars at times as you were describing it in your book. But one thing I didn't think of, because you were so well at describing your adventure and what was going on and the attitudes of Tom and Jerry from time to time, and was the fact that, you have water out there to drink, mainly so you and your camels can stay alive, but you're facing sandstorms. But here's something that I totally overlooked that I thought was funny, but it comes up now because you're talking about people bringing all these devices onto their big adventure to conquer something, and that simply is, what did you do to take a shower or a bath to just dust off every once in a while, being that there's no water out there almost?
Well, of course, it's the same thing as when I walk to the pole. People ask me, how did you shower? Well, have you ever heard of anybody taking a shower, walking to the North Pole, and just stripping down at minus 50 degrees, minus 70 degrees would be a sensation in itself. So that answers that question. And in the Gobi, well, there's not enough water to be washing, and we might dab a little bit now and again, but that would be it. If we ever did come to a well, which wasn't that often, if there was any water, we could perhaps take a bucket of water and pour it over the top of each other, and that would be about it. We just go out there and we accept the fact that we're not going to shower every day. It's not home, and it's different. We don't shower every day. We don't even think about it every day. Bill didn't even take a comb, and he was very right when he said, what's the point? Who's going to see it? Why take the weight of a comb? And it's something else I have to do. If I don't take a comb, I don't have to do that. And it all makes sense.
Or a shaving kit, for that matter.
Yes, why bother with all of that stuff? And so it's just the way you have. If you accept those things, life is so much easier. If you go out there thinking, now, how am I going to shower every day in the Gobi Desert, and how will I wash my hair every day? And what about my makeup? What makeup should I take at those temperatures? And Bill, of course,
probably none would be a good answer.
Yes, exactly. Don't forget about the showers and forget about the comb. Forget about the makeup. Put on your desert clothes, your survival gear, and put on your survival mind and your thought process, and off you go, and you'll have a great time. But if you're continually worried about all of that, you'd never make it.
Well, of course you would. Be totally self-destructive, that's for sure.
It would be ridiculous.
You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program, and our guest today is someone who walked with her husband, Bill. She was 63, he was 74, with 2 camels named Tom and Jerry, 1,600 miles across the Gobi Desert. Now, as I like to go out into the woods, as like what you talk about, to keep it simple, to really listen and be with and in nature, how would you describe the personality of the Gobi Desert? Because you've been to North and South America, down the Amazon. I'm sure you felt very unique personalities. If you could personify the Gobi, what would you say its personality was like?
I would say that on one hand, it's very, very harsh, and it's only for those who are prepared to travel in survival mode. But on the other hand, it can be one of the most beautiful places. The sunsets and the stars, the starry sky at night is just amazing. And it was at night times we realized what a tremendous privilege it was for us to be there, and a privilege to see such beautiful sunsets and the show of stars at night. It was just really very, very extraordinary. And it was the night times that brought our bodies back to life so that we could face another day of those 15 to 18 hour long hot walks. And we would look forward to tonight when we didn't have to travel. We could just sit and look and feel the coolness that could drop 30 degrees easily overnight. And so on one hand, there's a very harsh side, but on the other hand, there's a very soft, welcoming side to it that makes you feel, gosh, what a privilege it is to be here and how happy I am to be here.
And you also described, too, that even being foreigners, that you were very welcomed, and the hospitality from the nomadic peoples that you encountered, was just tremendous. And even as you were talking about encountering the Chinese Border Patrol and the possible outcomes, there was that harsh reality. Hey, what if me being a woman, I'm discovered and the possibility of rape, that was even crossing your husband's mind, but you realized as they discovered what your intention was there, you weren't a drug smuggler, that they actually began to help. And I thought one of the most kind moments is that as you were walking along a particular trek, as you were seeing many dead animals such as goat and sheep that might have ran astray from the herds, but you also encountered two camels that were basically dying of thirst. And as you went to the next station and said, is there any way that you can help these camels? They were more than willing to say, yeah, get in the Jeep, take them out some water, and get these things, soaked up so we can maybe use them. And so the level of humanity you would find out in a desolate place, even you being as foreigners, must have just been heartwarming.
Oh, it was wonderful to experience that, because it was heartbreaking to us to meet these two camels, and this is when we were going through the canyons, and we were very close to the Chinese border, and we did indeed just shortly after cross it, and this is when we were discovered by the Border Patrol. But even though the interrogation was tough and we were threatened with being shot and all these sorts of things, when it was over and I asked the captain if they could do anything for these two camels that we had to pass by. We tried to bring them with us, but Bill pushed, I pulled, and then we both pushed, and nothing was working. We even hooked them onto Tom and Jerry and tried to pull them, but they wouldn't budge. They'd given up, and they had just accepted their fate, that they were going to die, and they were just standing there ready to drop. But the soldiers went back, and they were to give them water, and they became government camels, and very well treated for the rest of their lives. And so that made us feel very good. It made us realize that these people, of course, they depend on their animals, and to such a great degree, and they really showed it, and it really fit our concept of taking care of the animals around us, and they proved that they certainly do that.
Well, it looks to me, Helen, like we might have a caller here from New Jersey, and you're out there. You're on the Beyond 50 radio program. Did you have a question or a comment for Ms. Helen Thayer? If you're out there. Sometimes people can be a little bit timid, but I thought I'd go ahead and give it a shot. You can also submit chat messages as well if you have a question or a comment that you'd like to share with either myself or our guest. But you are available. I think we're trying to pick him up, or her, whoever it may be. But in the meantime, just jump on in if you do have a question or a comment. Again, the book is Walking the Gobi, and our guest today is Helen Thayer. Now, do you have an upcoming thing that you and your husband are planning to do next?
Yes, we're planning a 3,000-mile walk across Bhutan and Tibet, and people can go to my website. It's www.helenthayer.com, just Helen Thayer, one word, .com, and that's HELENTHAYER, Helen Thayer. And on that website, you can keep track of what we're going to be doing. We're going to do some updates, some newsletters, and so forth. And There's also the Adventure Classroom website that we're presently developing. That's not quite ready yet, but we have it about halfway, so people can go to those websites and keep track of our future plans and where we're going to be walking to study Indigenous cultures next.
That's fantastic. I think it's just so wonderful that you're doing such things like that, so you can bring a more 3 or 4 dimensional sense of geography than just the basic globe spinning around, here's Arizona and Phoenix is a city in it, but there's also the vast desert, outside of Phoenix. And when you're talking about the places that you've gone, I'm sure that you've had thousands and millions of questions, what was it like, how do you do this, and so forth and so on. But how have people responded to you and your husband on this particular track? I mean, what have they said to you or said, are you out of your minds? What made you decide to do something like this? But you can see it's also for the passion of education, big time.
Well, people generally, I've been giving many, many programs. I speak to corporate America and the non-profits and schools. I've spoken to over 1 million kids in schools so far, and I've been doing this since 1988 when I produced the first program for Adventure Classroom, and then I wrote the book Polar Dream, and then after we lived 1 year with wolves, I wrote the book 3 Among the Wolves. So I do a lot of speaking throughout the country, and in fact overseas, and I'm constantly told that your story is inspiring. It's helped me to see my way past my own barriers, and comments like this that are very encouraging to us. It motivates us to keep going and do more and bring more back to those who want to hear about it and who want to read my books. And as long as we feel that we're doing some good with this, it certainly does motivate us to do more.
Well, that's fantastic. I think it's also good to realize that as we like to share with our young, it isn't about getting old, it isn't about retiring and then taking that money and going on crazy adventures, but it's about what you do with your life. And certainly your parents must have instilled some marvelous values that here you are at the age of 70, your next trek is to Tibet. It seems like life should just unfold continuously for you because you seem to really enjoy and embrace what it has offered up so far just because of the kind of action that you have taken in your life. And our hats off to you. It's been a marvelous opportunity to have you on our program today to definitely educate and inspire others. That all it takes is that first step on the 1,000-mile journey. The question is, do you have the attitude and the willingness? What would you like to share with our audience in closing?
Well, I like to tell people that age is no barrier to your dreams. Set your goals, plan to win, plan for success, be persistent, and don't give up when it gets tough. Be encouraged to know that we're all very special, and we all have very special goals, and they're all worthwhile goals and all worthwhile striving for. And sometimes we bump our noses on problems. That rocky road to success sometimes is a tough one, but we found that just one step at a time is what it takes. And finally you reach that goal and that you're ready for the next one. And life can just be so much of an exciting adventure, and always looking ahead and being optimistic. It's tremendously rewarding for us, and I know it is for everybody out there.
And I know even in the end that you can have some of these unexpected accolades put onto you, is that, as I understand, you were named one of the great explorers of the 20th century. That almost has a Sir Edmund Hillary ring to it, doesn't it?
Well, I don't like to put myself up on that sort of level. Ed Hillary is a very, very special person, whereas I feel that I'm rather ordinary compared to Ed, but he's so very special. And but these honors and awards were actually invited by the Hillary and Bill Clinton to the White House in 1999 to meet with us and talk about our expeditions because one of them had read Polar Dream, my first book. And those sort of honors are absolutely wonderful, but we take them with both feet on the ground. We realize who we are. We're just ordinary people, really. The only difference is perhaps sometimes I think that I was most fortunate, and my husband as well. We've found the goals that we want early in life, and we've gone after them and have been successful in reaching them because we are both a couple of very persistent people, and we're goal setters. And as a team, we have become very strong. But everybody has that ability, really. Everyone is very special.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. And again, the book is Walking the Gobi, and our guest today, Helen Thayer. And Helen, I'd like you to go ahead and give that website again so people can find out more of the educational value of why you're, another reason why you're motivated to do these wonderful adventures.
Well, my website is Helen Thayer, all one word, HelenThayer.com. And we have another website called AdventureClassroom.com. Adventure Classroom is about halfway through being constructed, so be a little patient with us there and just watch progress. And but from my website, you can keep track of what we're doing in my books, and also email me. Anybody who'd like to email me, I love to get emails, and I take time to answer all my emails.
I think that's fantastic, too. Again, it's also to inspire people that if you're going to go out and get into an adventure, also do it with the respect and at times even the humility that's required, so then that way you can really feel the sense of spiritual growth and personal growth that you can have as part of the adventure package. And Helen Thayer, we want to thank you so much for taking the time to join us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much. Again, the book is Walking the Gobi, and our guest today, Helen Thayer. You can go to her website, HelenThayer.com, and that is all one word, HelenThayer.com, and you can find out what they're up to, those fun little adventures, and also get some of that good advice in case you want to go out and do an adventure on your own, but you want to do it with, I think, the kind of respect that adventures such as this are afforded. I'm Daniel Davis. We thank you for joining us today. And if you want to find out more information about our radio show, we are on every Friday from 12 to 1. That's 12 noon to 1 o'clock. That is Pacific Standard Time. We encourage your questions, comments. You can submit chats during the program. You can also call in. We had somebody from New Jersey who was calling in here, but apparently they just didn't get through. We're sorry about that, but we do acknowledge that you're out there. And but visit our website. It's beyond50radio.com. That is 50 with a 50, and you can find out about our marvelous guests, such as Helen Thayer today, how you can maybe even submit a nice little email in case you're planning a special little journey somewhere she might have been and what you need to do to plan for that. Because that's what we're about. We're about good resources. We're about good education. We're also about empowering and enlightening people to feel inspired to move forward with each and every step, as they used to say, that each journey begins, each 1,000-mile journey begins with a single step. And that's what we like to start here on the Beyond 50 radio program. Shoot us any questions or comments you got by email. Just go to our website, beyond50radio.com. That is 50 with a 50. And we also send out a free weekly e-newsletter. Comes into your email. All you have to do is just sign up right there on the cover page. You'll see it right there. It isn't spammed, and it's also something that we don't sell your information, so it's just strictly to receive the newsletter so you can find out about our past programs and our upcoming programs. We want to thank all of you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today. And I'm Daniel Davis, and remember, live your day past halfway.